All right, you're listening to the Maker's Quest podcast. I'm Brian Benham.
And I am Greg Porter. And tonight or today or whatever time of day you're listening to this podcast, we're going to be talking a little bit about our secret design inspiration, where we find that here online and maybe even some of it offline. But for the most part, I think we're going to keep it online. And Brian, we'll start with you. When you're looking for creative ideas or creative inspiration, where's one of those places that you turn?
Well, I think before I tell you what that
Oh,
place is, I want to provide a little bit of a context because
yeah.
as I was kind of making my list of things where I find most of my inspiration from, I realized that most of those aren't woodworking channels, which might surprise people that I don't watch any woodworking content hardly at all, unless something just they did a really good job on their clickbait title, and I can't stop myself from clicking. But most everything I watch these days is non-YouTube stuff, and I think that is mainly because I'm trying to grow myself and my business in other aspects other than just woodworking because I've been doing woodworking so long, and a lot of that kind of stems back from uh, probably when we were kids. Like there's that kind of a negative connotation that the troublemakers go to shop class. And
Mm.
I have seen some of that interaction in my professional career when I work with interior designers or architects for things that I'm building for them. They will often treat guys like me as just the workers and not as design professionals.
Mm.
So recently I was well, let me back up a little bit. So I've been trying to advocate for myself to be in the design room to help make some of those design decisions on the things that I'm building. And so I was recently in a room with an interior designer, the client that's house is being built, and the architectural designer. And they had all these really beautiful photo renders that they have done of their designs and things. And I'm sitting here with my little crunchy SketchUp model, right? So
Mhm.
I decided like I need to step up my game and learn photo rendering and really learn Photoshop and all these other things. So my first secret YouTube channel that I watch is called Lighting Mentor by Jeremy. And I think I have mentioned him before on this podcast because when I was trying to up my Photoshop game, he was like way at the bottom of the list of the search because he doesn't do just your typical YouTube stuff. He does his own thing. He's an actual professional working in the industry of Photoshop and color design and all that. He's like a colorist for Pixar. So he really shares
Yeah.
how light and shadow work. And so his channel has really inspired me to um, work with Photoshop more than just photo editing, but to be able to paint in Photoshop and take my photo renderings that I have done and really like bring them up to another level in Photoshop.
Yeah. I watched some of his long format videos where he starts painting pictures from scratch,
Yeah.
and you want to talk about a phenomenal talent. That guy is insanely talented. Um, that's interesting. Yeah. And it's funny that you watch him too. I don't think I've missed a single video of his since he
Yeah,
started his
they're
channel.
fantastic.
Yeah. Well,
Uh,
so kind of flipping over, I was going to talk about I do watch a little bit of woodworking on YouTube, and it's probably more for the personality check in than it is to learn how to do woodworking. And not that I know everything there is to know, but I don't I don't do a lot of high end capital W woodworking, if you want to call it that. That's not what I do. But I do watch some of those folks, and one of the people that I watch that I find absolutely fascinating, and I think he plays well above the rim with all of the work he does, is Sawyer Design. And I don't know if you've seen his channel, but he does very organic shapes, a lot of vacuum bag type things with veneers that are cut from solid wood billets that he, uses to start the project and that sort of thing. And what I find most fascinating about his videos is he talks through the design. It's not just how to do it. It's not how to make a rabbit cut interact with a dovetail or something like that. Sorry, that's a terrible reference. I'd have my hand slapped for saying something like that out loud. But he talks through not just the woodworking aspect of it, but really the design and how the design flows, what the concept is, how that concept is being realized, and how it's being reinforced with the way that he puts the project together. And, of course, there's a little humor involved and some other things, but the bulk of what I've learned from that channel is, really don't shy away from the concept. Drive it as far as you think you can drive it and challenge yourself on every project to do something that you may not have been able to do last time. And Brian, you've talked about that several times, and that each piece that you do helps you grow a little bit more. And, the dovetails that you do, I'm using dovetails, but the joinery that you do 5 years from now is built on the joinery that you're doing today, but you may not be at the level to do what you can do 5 years in the future. And anyway, I find that aspect of that YouTube channel just fascinating, how he challenges himself, and a lot of stuff goes in the bin. It doesn't ever see the light of day, but the stuff that does see the light of day is just phenomenal.
Yeah, I think to piggyback off your design comment, that of building on past designs, is a lot of designers design within their skill set. So if you stop growing your skill set, your designs start to kind of stagnate. But if you keep growing your skill set, then it sparks new ideas in your brain. It's like, oh, I could use that skill to design or build this other thing, and then just everything just keeps moving up.
Yeah, for certain. It's the old adage of, when you're a hammer, everything looks like a nail.
Hmm. Yeah, exactly.
You've got to not just be a hammer, you've got to be a hammer and a saw and a chisel and a plane and a, fill in the
Hmm.
blank.
Yeah.
What else do you have for us, Brian?
So the next one is called the Future Academy, and there's two of these channels. One is called Just the Future, and it's primarily like a business oriented channel of how to run a business. And I don't really get into that too much, but then he has a second channel that's not as popular as his business channel, called the Future Academy, and it's run by a guy named Chris Do. He is a graphic designer, or was a graphic designer. And when he first started his channels, he really talked about the art of graphic design. And so if you were designing a poster for your art portfolio or whatever, if you're like going to school as a graphic designer, you could send your poster in to be critiqued by him. And so he'd do all these critiques of how to properly design a poster, how to figure out the fonts, how to um, figure out spacing and layout grids and all of that stuff. And so I've kind of lost track a little bit of his channel because he's went from running a professional graphic design studio to running a professional YouTube studio. And so the
Ah,
the 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 quality kind of goes down because YouTube promotes the simple thoughts, not the deep thoughts, because everybody gets the simple thoughts and click on them. That's
yeah.
kind of a rude thing to say, but I believe that's true. Like, if you want to get a large audience, you got to appeal to a broad audience.
Yeah.
But if you look at my YouTube channel, there is a table that I built that has this metal disc that I suspended in a segmented ring. And then off to the side of that, it has this geometric pattern. And that geometric pattern, based off the Fibonacci sequence, but it's not exactly, it was modified to fit the space. But he was really the one that really kind of showed how he lays out a poster using that sequence. And I
Oh yeah.
was watching that and I thought, well, I could apply that to woodworking. Like this whole laying out a grid thing, and that got me into all kinds of other grids, and then I ended up buying a book of grids, of how to lay things out from grids. And so I went down this huge rabbit hole, And yeah, so this adjacent design adjacent thing really inspired my woodworking designs.
I, yeah, I find it fascinating when you can get completely off trail, what you'll find. And I think the general comment that I have is the further away you can get from what you're doing, sometimes the better the inspiration. And it's this counterintuitive thing. If I'm doing a woodworking project, I need to study woodworkers, and sometimes that couldn't be further from the truth. Uh, that's
Right.
cool.
So if you're designing a like an end table and you Google end tables on Google Images and you look at all these end tables, then all of a sudden your end table is going to start to look like everybody else's end table.
Yeah,
Yeah.
it's gonna be the car. Well, it interestingly enough, it goes back to that notion of a copy of a copy of a copy of a copy. At some point, it just gets so degraded that what's the value? And sometimes you have to throw that thing away and start with something completely different. Uh,
Yeah, that reminds me of a conversation we had offline about what really is mid-century modern, right? Like,
oh, here it comes,
yeah,
Brian.
I
You
know.
just stirred that snake pit.
Yeah, that's like a whole thing. Like so much of what the YouTubers put out today, they use that buzzword mid-century modern, and
Yeah.
everything is like at a little angle, and they call it mid-century modern. But when
Yeah.
you really dive into what really was going on, that it was there's so much more in sculptural works.
Yeah, mid-century modern was the place where composites started to really take over in so many different arenas. And the YouTube definition of I might get some hate here, but the YouTube definition of mid-century modern is shaker with an angle. And
Right. Yeah,
it's
exactly.
yeah, it's very anyway.
Yeah,
Uh
so if that upsets you, send your angry emails to Greg at thetruthhurts.com. Um
yeah.
or Brian at thetruthhurts.com. But yeah.
Well, I think the fun thing is, and for the listeners out there who've been boondoggled by the YouTube definition of mid-century modern, just do yourself a favor and really look into mid-century modern furniture. And a lot of it was fiberglass and plastic based, metal based, and obviously there are some things that sort of nod back to that next evolution of mission style is kind of what I would classify it as, but um there's definitely some roots there and some other things. Like it's not just completely pulled out of thin air, but that movement was about, new materials and new things that came about in, call it the 50s and the 60s, that were all the rage, and a lot of bright colors and things of that nature too.
Hmm.
Uh, were part of that. But let's get back on topic so that we don't just blow up the comments with things about mid-century modern and how stupid we are about our furniture knowledge. But one of the one of the other again, woodworking adjacent YouTube channels that I watch is Ingles Coach Shop. And so the gentleman on there rebuilds old wagon wheels and old Conestoga wagon type vehicles. I don't know. Do you call them vehicles at that point if they're not self-propelled? But just means of transportation. And the type of woodworking and coopery that he's involved in is fascinating to me. Not everything that he does, but a lot of the repairs he does are hub and spoke type repairs on, ancient pieces of, not ancient, but very old, vintage pieces of wagons and things of that nature. And the way that they did things with very few tools and very low tolerance, but able to create something that's round and rolls without, jostling it. That that channel has fascinated me, and it where I take the inspiration from is old world techniques to do things that are somehow very precise. And there's no CNC machine, there's no milling machine, there's no bearings that you can call up on the internet and order from McMaster Carr. It's all, starts with steel strap and things that you can just get ubiquitously 120 years ago from the general store. And how that practice with that practice, you're able to do so many cool things that way. So yeah, that's a cool one. Hit us with your
Yeah.
next one, Brian,
Well, before I
or
hit
your thoughts there.
But yeah, before I hit you with my next one, I'll tell you my one thought. Like when I was a kid, right, where I've talked about the Woodwright Shop with Roy Underhill on PBS, right?
Yeah.
And I was really, really into woodworking at the time, but he would also go to like a blacksmith shop and they would put a metal wheel on a spoke or something like that, something like what you're saying. And I remember as a kid, I was like, oh, I really was hoping he'd do a woodworking episode now. And then that was just my young mind being closed. And now when I watch things, I want to watch it all, not just the woodworking stuff, because I've realized that all this other stuff that plays in, or all this other things of how to do things can transfer into woodworking.
Yeah.
So my next one is Dammy Lee Architecture.
Ooh.
And she's not uh an architecture education channel or a channel that talks about architecture in the traditional sense, where you think, oh, it's an architecture, so they're going to talk about Frank Lloyd Wright or that kind of stuff. No, this is way out there stuff. A lot of her videos are thought experiments. So she will take a movie like Dune or Star Wars or whatever, and take the architecture out of that movie and talk about how that architecture told the story in the movie, and then create a
Mm.
thought experiment about like, okay, so what if we lived in this building, in this thing, like if we were in Blade Runner or what's a more modern movie like Dune. I don't know if you've seen Dune, but what would it be like to live in these places, living in those type of cities, and what that would do to us mentally, physically. It's just a really great channel to get you thinking outside of, like, everybody talks about thinking outside the box, right? But like this is really outside of the box thinking, right? Like if you're on Mars, how are you going to live in that city? What's your day-to-day life going to be?
Yeah. Outside the atmosphere. Oh my.
Yeah.
Yeah. That's that's about as far outside as you can get.
Yeah.
Wow. I haven't heard of that channel. I'm gonna have to check that one out for
Yeah,
sure.
oh, it's fan, especially you as an architect. I think you would
Oh yeah.
find it fascinating because it's not, she's not like, oh, here's how to do architecture. It's like here's this building that I found fascinating in this movie, and she really goes into this crazy, thought-provoking things.
One of the first projects I did in architecture school, our teacher was he was a Harvard, I guess, graduate school of design graduate and 4.0 student, and he was as far out in the stratosphere as any one human being could get in terms of his abstract ability to abstract things and think of things in a completely different way. And the first project we did was to watch a movie called Woman in the Dunes, and it was one of those uh, film noir type of experiences where you're watching it's a short film and you're watching it and it's like, what is this? And it was, some ladies struggle with living in the sand. And then our project was to design a residence or a habitable environment for this lady in the dunes. And it was a complete belly flop of a project. Most people were completely uninspired because they just didn't understand it on a level that they could even react. But
Yeah.
it's interesting how a lot of those cinematic endeavors find their way into architects' minds.
Yeah,
I
for
haven't
sure.
I haven't revisited that type of project since. That was the last movie based design work that I did, which I'm sort of happy for. Um, but again, another channel that's adjacent to woodworking. This is gonna be a theme
Yeah.
all night or all day long here for me. Is Tales from a Shipwright, and I don't know if you've ever seen this channel, and I can't remember who recommended this channel to me. And I'm saying this, I think it was Jimmy DiResta might have, but I don't know that for a fact. But this gentleman builds boats from the ground up and he repairs old boats and he walks through that process and the thinking and the design. And hey, today we're going to build an 18, I don't know all the names of the ships, but 18-foot Hatteras, and it's going to have this kind of a bulwarks in it and blah blah blah. All of the terms that shipbuilders use and the way that they start to put together and design their boats, you get to walk through that with him, and it is fascinating to see his work. It's not always a blow by blow type of situation. There's a lot of things that happen without the camera on, which you can probably imagine. Building boats, you can't detail those, or you would never get any boats built.
Yeah. I
But
was just looking, I swear I subscribed to him, but I haven't seen a video from him in forever. Is he still doing it?
I
I haven't,
gosh,
he's
I
not on
want to
my,
I want to say that I saw something from him maybe a week or 2 weeks ago.
oh,
It
I'm gonna
hasn't
have to
been.
look that up.
I'm pretty sure I saw something from him not too long ago, but fascinating stuff. And again, working with wood, but not in a way that furniture makers or people in the construction business work with wood. It's a completely different thing to build an amorphous boat shape like that and figure out how to get it done on dry land. So, uh, yeah, he's one of the guys that I find a ton of inspiration from, and it's how do you work in that third dimension forcefully, and he does a wonderful job.
Yeah. When I was watching him way back in the day, before I lost track of him, one of the things I really enjoyed about his channel was that it was just like a problem solving
Yeah.
thing. Like we're doing this boat. You can't go down to Home Depot all the time to buy the boat tool, right? And so he just shows like how he's going to figure out how to get this thing. So it's like there's this really good mind exercise of how to solve problems.
Yeah. And not to disparage anyone about their age, but somebody at his age, he's seen a lot and
Seen a
reacted
lot
to a
of
lot and
problems. Yeah.
thought through a lot of problems. And I think in a lot of ways, in this philosophically, YouTube is doing such a wonderful job of archiving the knowledge that some of these people like Tales from a Shipwright has, that otherwise there's a handful of people who that would have been handed down to, but now it's anybody who wants it.
Wants
And
to learn. Yeah.
that stuff I think as human beings 100 years from now, the ability for us to educate ourselves is going to be on a whole different level. And that just accelerates the pace at which we evolve and do really cool things that we can't do today.
Yeah, that's a scary thought that one day, like YouTube might just flip the switch and turn it off, and all that knowledge of everybody that's participated in the platform just goes away.
Yeah.
And then it'd be like the pyramids of Egypt. Like
How
no
they
one
do it.
knows really exactly how they were built. They just are there.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Was it aliens?
Yeah. Well, I mean that's a plausible experience. There's a article a while ago. Now I don't know how it's so hard to tell anymore if it's a BS article or from an actual quality source, but they've been finding planets that appear to have some kind of atmosphere on them
Yeah.
in the out there in the ether.
Oh, if we're not going to go down this rabbit hole, but we could. It'd be so much fun. But
Oh, about the alien thing. Wait, dude, my favorite 100% all-time favorite show, X-Files.
yeah,
Yeah. Yeah, and
yeah,
that's coming bringing that back to topic that wasn't on my list for tonight. But
yeah,
one of the things that I love about X-Files is that everybody hates on Mulder. Like he's just like this stupid nut job guy, and Scully's like, no, no, that's scientifically impossible, and blah blah blah. And they just crap on him, but he's so determined and so in firm in his convictions to find the truth that time and time again he proves the crazy thing right, not just with like the alien things, but like
yeah,
with all the crazy characters, the guy that eats people or the guy that eats skin or the vampires or whatever. He always just like has such an open mind about everything that he can solve the crime.
yeah, yeah. Now it's well, it's an interesting topic. Like I say, we could do a whole show
Yeah.
on aliens.
Keep an open mind, not so aliens,
Yeah.
not so we don't have aliens as the takeaway, like, but like keeping an open mind would be the
Yeah.
takeaway of that show, I would say.
Yeah. Well, and I think part of it is historically there's always been you go back, right? There's always been people who say this guy's crazy what he thinks, and then 100 or 400 or 1,000 years, everybody's like, no, he was actually right.
Yeah.
The Earth does move around the sun, not the other way around. Oh, and the Earth isn't flat. Oh God, there's another box of worms.
Oh
We
yeah.
need to
So
stop.
holy shit, that's a big one too for some people.
Yeah, but you know, as we go on, the thought that's the craziest thought that we can have right now may get proven to be factual
Be true.
long
Yeah.
after we're gone. So
Yeah. There's so much about the Earth we don't know.
yeah, well, um, thinking about well, you talked about X Files. Is that your piece? Do you want me to throw out
Yeah, we'll
another one?
throw that one out. You throw out your next one.
Okay. Now, this one is not woodworking adjacent. This one is directly in the middle of the target for woodworking, and it's David Mark's channel. And I
Oh
think
yeah.
probably most everybody in the woodworking world knows about David Marks, but I always feel it's my cultural responsibility to remind people that he has a YouTube channel now, and once a week he's putting up a video from his, did he have a nine season series or seven
I
season
think it's
series?
got 9 seasons. Yeah, he
Nine
was on for a long
seasons,
time.
9 seasons on PBS. Changed my life. When I was in college, I
Hmm.
was watching David Marks, and up until that point, it was sort of Norm Abrams. Everybody had seen Norm, and Norm is an incredible powerhouse talent in the woodworking world. But Norm was recreating things, a lot of Shaker stuff, back to Shaker things, but then a lot of Queen Anne period
Yeah,
furniture and
Norm
things
would
that,
go take you to the museum and show you the museum piece as part of his show.
yeah. And
Yep.
then he would recreate it, sometimes in a modern way, sometimes with some adjustments, but he would show you, he would dissect what they did and then try as legitimately to recreate that piece in a way that's going to be more useful. And everybody knew Norm. David Marks came around, and he was the first person that I saw that had some type of a program on PBS that focused on design and doing things with that in mind, not some copied plan, but something that took inspiration, pushed it down the road quite a ways, and then turned that into a piece of art. And he talked through the entire process of what he was thinking, how he was matching woods. Was he book matching things? Was he cutting veneers? Was he making patterns and carving? How was he getting to this point? And that, to me, I was watching it while I was in design school, and it was such a huge piece of my development as a designer to understand that you could think beyond just, I'm going to make something out of a generic board. I want to look for a specific board with a specific type of pattern that speaks to me, and then I'm going to design around that piece of wood to make this thing into something that nobody's ever seen before. And so David Marks, there, he is very high on my list. And when he announced that he was going to start doing that on YouTube, I think I was turning circles
Yeah.
upstairs in my living room, because it had been so long since I had seen those original episodes when they would come out on PBS.
Yeah. So also Norm is also releasing all of his stuff. He has a New
Yes.
Yankee Workshop channel as well. So you can get quality woodworking on YouTube from those two guys. And I want to keep going with David Marks there. Like a lot of the metal work that I do was inspired by David Marks. He was really the first one that I saw that took uh, metal and silver leafed things and added patina to metal, and I thought, huh, that's really cool. And then I just kind of went off on my own direction from what I learned from him. So yeah, huge inspiration.
He was maybe the first person that I saw that, from a sculptor's perspective, would show how you could make a repeatable sculptable piece by using templates and that whole mindset of I'm going to create a process that's repeatable for a piece of art. So if I want to have 5 things in a series and have them all be very, very similar to one another, this is how you do it. And wow, what a, again, huge impact on my design brain, but then even my production brain for some of the work that I do on the manufacturing side of things, where I have to, maybe it's make 5 things, but maybe it's make 1,000 things. That pattern making mindset is a completely different rabbit hole to go down, and he was the one who introduced me to that as well. So anyway, huge kudos. My shop today is still, my table saw router setup is that way because of what I saw David Marks do back in the 90s.
Yeah. So then also keep going,
Sure.
sculptural works. Um, Up until that point, when I see a woodworking sculpture, I always thought, okay, so they took a big tree trunk and they carved it. And David Marks was kind of the one that introduced me into bent lamination, gluing up a whole bunch of little thin pieces and then
Yeah.
bending it around the form, bending it into the shape that you want.
What a great inspiration. Well, let's turn it over
All right,
to
so
your next.
my next one would be the SketchUp YouTube channel. So this one is kind of
Yeah,
woodworking
sure.
adjacent. But the thing about the SketchUp YouTube channel is um, SketchUp was originally designed as an architectural tool for architects to sketch and draw stuff, right? So their YouTube channel isn't necessarily architectural based because it's the marketing department that is doing all the drawings. But there are some guys on there like Aaron Dietzen, who is an artist. He just opened an art gallery. Shout out Aaron's art gallery up in the Boulder area. I don't know what it's called off the top of my head, but if I find it, I'll put it in the show notes. But Aaron is one of the main guys that runs the YouTube channel, and he one day he's like, "Okay, every Friday we're going to do a live drawing, and we're going to spend 3 hours drawing live. You can just watch us draw, and we'll talk about Star Wars or whatever to try to keep it entertaining, so people are commenting." And so they've created this little community, and it's great. One day he's drawn the Millennium Falcon, the next day he's drawing the Eiffel Tower, the next week he's drawing SpongeBob or the dog from Toy Story,
Mhm.
just like all these crazy things. So you wouldn't think that you're going to learn anything by watching him draw a dog from Toy Story, but that's how to draw sculptural shapes in SketchUp, right? So now I'm
Yeah.
like, well, that kind of unlocked a new level of design in my SketchUp ability because now I can draw like sculpted furniture in SketchUp before, which is really difficult to do because SketchUp is a mesh modeler, not necessarily a solid modeler. But yeah, so it's this really great community. They have a really great forum that if you need help with, and then since these guys are all publicly facing, if you have a question, so back to my first one where I was
Mhm.
trying to learn how to do photo rendering, there's a guy that does all the educational photo rendering on YouTube, and I was really struggling with a certain aspect, and I just DM'd him, and the next day he DM'd me back with an answer on how to do the thing. So
Oh,
I
that's
don't know
awesome.
about what kind of any other software company out there that has that kind of hands-on level of just community. So that was definitely one of my secret inspirations for learning how to design better in SketchUp.
I saw that they recently came out, I think it was recent, came out with ambient occlusion in SketchUp, which is pretty cool.
Yeah, I have yet to find a use case for that since I started doing photo rendering, but it does have as a nice little touch to your sketches.
Yeah, that's yeah, cool technology that they're adding to that program. Well, let's see, kind of moving down the list. Um, One of the channels that's uh, I'm going to say it's new to YouTube. I think he's been at it for a year, maybe 2 years, but he's been an inspiration to me since the 80s. Yeah, I'll call it the late 80s, very early 90s, is Ken Parker, and his channel is called Arch Toppery. And Ken is a guitar builder, and he had a company. I'm saying I followed him since the 80s. He came out with the Parker guitar, the Parker Fly, in the late 80s, I believe. Might have been the mid 80s, but I knew of it in the late 80s. And it was the first of its kind. It was a guitar that used composites. And so they used carbon fiber to allow them to make super thin, super lightweight guitars. So your average guitar might weigh 7 to 9 pounds, I think is the average. And his guitars weighed in at like 2.5, 3 pounds. And he could have made them lighter, but his investment group wanted his pickups to be interchangeable with all other guitars that were on the market. And he had a design for some ultra lightweight pickups. So he could have taken like another half pound out of his guitars or something like that. But the Parker Fly guitars used a carbon fiber fretboard that the frets were glued to instead of pounded into a piece of wood. Um, just a fascinating level of detail that no one had ever put into a guitar. So that is how I was introduced to who. I didn't know Ken Parker. I knew Parker guitars. Fast forward to maybe a year and a half ago, I stumble upon his channel Arch Toppery, and I start putting the pieces together that this is Ken Parker from Parker Guitars, because the headstock on his arch top guitars were the same as the Parker Fly. And I'm like, no way is this guy making archtop guitars and putting that crazy headstock on them. And I tune in, and sure enough, it's Ken Parker, and he's doing composite archtop jazz style guitars with these necks that are like a heat molded carbon fiber process. Like, it's insane amount of what I would call mixed media design for guitar building, and from bending veneers to machining parts for guitars. It's so far out of the realm of what normal guitar building looks like, because it involves machining, it involves composites, it involves woodworking, it involves engineering and math and all of these other talents that you develop over an entire lifespan. And that's where Ken is. He learned to build archtop guitars back in the 70s, I believe, but he was building them in a very traditional style with dovetail neck joints and all the timbers that we know and love, rosewood and ebony and those sort of things. And he's kind of turned that entire archtop building community on its head by implementing all of the things he learned at Parker Guitars in the 80s and 90s about composites and things of those natures. But his series has been underwritten by a trust that invests in artists and artists sharing their stories. And so he has gotten a grant to do his work on YouTube, and he is sharing everything that he has ever learned about guitar making and in his crazy world. It is fascinating. I would tell anybody, I don't care what you're into, if you can go watch Ken's videos, there's no doubt in my mind you will be inspired to take a completely different route the next time you're looking at something.
Yeah, that goes back to what we were saying about continually building on what you've learned and just keep expanding and trying to push that envelope.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, you're up, Brian.
All right. So, practical engineering. Have you heard of
I
that guy?
I have.
Grady? Yeah.
Yeah.
He's great. Like, I don't know. I have a lot to say about his channel other than just like the importance of learning how just the world around us works, right? Just
Yeah.
understanding the world we live in, can go a um, huge step forward.
Yeah. Well, the thing is, right? We're surrounded by engineering every day. And a lot of us don't realize it, how much engineering goes into certain things. And the thing I would tell you is almost anybody can hack together something that will work. What engineers do is they refine that thing into the minimum pieces and parts, and make things very efficient. We've been building houses out of wood studs for how many hundreds of years now, anyone can do it. But what an engineer can do is they can step in and say, you can make this more efficient by removing this, making these things thinner, and get this performance out of this thing. And I think when we look at the world around us through the lens of engineering and understand that the reason we can make skyscrapers, and the weight of a skyscraper, the weight of the frame of a skyscraper is almost nothing compared to the weight that it can carry, and the force that it can withstand because of our engineers and the numbers they crunch and the way they take a piece of steel and understand what is the bare minimum that I need for this building to stand. I'll add a little bit to that and then let's go.
Yeah.
So having somebody look at our world through that lens and explain it in a fashion that is more digestible maybe than most engineers can put it, I think is incredibly useful.
Yeah. So people talk about we need to bring shop class back, but I
Yeah.
think we need to bring like not shop class back, but bring like a maker class to learn how to make things to facilitate the future engineers. My oldest daughter is currently working on her master's degree. She just got her bachelor's, or she will at the end of this term have her bachelor's degree, but she's working on her master's degree in chemical engineering. And one of the projects she worked on was she had to build a thing to compress some polymers,
Mhm.
and like her and her team, incredibly smart kids, they are doing math that we wasn't even around when we were kids. Like I don't
Yeah.
even know the math, so they had all the math figured out, all the stuff figured out, but where they were struggling is building the rig to compress the thing. And so of course I build things, so my daughter calls me and says, how would you build this thing? And so I helped her build this thing. And the thing that I discovered that working with these kids to build their rig is that there is a big gap in the physical, practical knowledge of how to build things versus the math,
Yeah.
because
The-
they grew up in a time when there was no shop class or anything like that. There was no hands-on in the schools to understand what the material was. That if you put a steel bolt into a aluminum fixture, that even though you threaded it nice with nice tolerances, and you start to crank that down, that you're going to rip those threads out of that aluminum because it's so much softer than the steel. Like that mindset wasn't there.
yeah. That's that's something I see. And for those who don't know, I'm a practicing architect during the day, is how I always say it. And then I do all my fun stuff at night, that you see on YouTube and social media and things like that. But one thing we're seeing in schools is a resurgence of what they're calling the CTE type education, so career and technical education. And we're seeing a combination, which what used to be wood shop is now becoming engineering, and they're overlaying what they learn kind of on the math and design side with the practical side of how do you actually do this thing. And I had the pleasure of interviewing some people from a company that actually, before we hopped on tonight, we talked a little bit about, which is Scaled Composites. And they're an aerospace design company, and they do test flights and design for some of the biggest companies out there because they can do them at about a quarter of the cost of what it takes a Boeing or an Airbus to do a design and test flight of a commercial plane. And they can do that because they make their own airplanes. And they do so by using uh, machining techniques, very large scale machining techniques, um, and practical forms that scaled composites you can imagine, right? They do composite type things, so layups of carbon fiber, fiberglass, and other mixed media is what I would say. Some of it is sandwiches that have resin involved with metals involved with honeycombs or other things. So, um, but one of the things I was able to learn from interviewing one of the big wigs really at Scale Composites was their engineers are forced to understand what their machinists do. It's they don't keep them separate. They want to make sure that if you're telling somebody to turn a piece on a lathe, that you understand what it takes to turn that piece on a lathe. Because when you have that understanding, you design with a much more informed perspective, and you can design something that, as you're designing it, it becomes easier and easier to build in the shop because you're refining not just the design itself, but the process to make that part. And anyway, I, again,
Yeah, no,
another
that's
fascinating conversation.
yeah, that's another elegant way, or a better elegant way of what I was trying to say when you're talking about Sawyer design of like keep learning new things. Well, like we design within what we know. So if your designers know how the lathe works, they can design more things that incorporate the lathe.
Well, and um, the thing that I would point out is I approach, I have a CNC mill up in my garage, up in my shop, and I approach machining from a completely different angle than most machinists do. And Tom, the guy who does a lot of my production machining, we'll talk back and forth on something, and I'll throw out a technique or a process that I don't even know. I don't know if you can do this or not, but it's a completely different approach. And he'll be like, you know what, that might be a great way to do this thing. So what I find interesting is when you get creative design minded people together with, call it, technical uh, folks who have a lot of skill in the shop, you can actually develop techniques to make things that you may not have thought possible before. And I think those are great things. But let's see. I think I'm up, aren't I? Am I up?
Yep, I think
Okay,
so.
I'm up. The next one I have on my list, and this one's really a fun one. Again, more long format type videos, but I get tons of inspiration from them. Is Envision Prototypes, and the gentleman who runs that channel builds cars, and he'll franken car things together. So he'll take the back half of one car and the other half of another car and put them together because they have certain components that he wants, but then he'll strip all the panels off of it and make completely new panels that do something that's a car design that nobody's ever seen. And so he is a car designer and a car builder. So he has a little bit of that Chip Foose in him, that he knows how to use an English wheel and planishing hammers and all the pull max tools that it takes to build a car body. But he's also a designer. So if there's a car that's kind of close to what his idea is, he might start with that car and cut it into a million pieces and then weld it all back together into a completely new style of car. But you see so many guys that work on cars, and they spend all their time forming those outer panels that you see, the shiny things that we see under the showroom lights. And the guy who runs Envision Prototype spends a lot of time showing, how do you make the door sills, and how do you make the A pillar? How do you tie the dash in with the firewall? All those hidden details that you have to have right, or the car doesn't work. If I have a seat and it's a true bucket style seat, and I want it to interact in this way with the console, how do I fabricate that? How do I make that? And his content is very long, and I would tell you that each video might have a nugget or two, but it's one of those things that I put on Sunday morning and I just let it rip. And as I'm eating my breakfast or whatever I'm doing, I'll watch him build cars for an hour, and you walk away going, wow. Not always does he make it look easy. It looks like it's hard work, but he allows you inside his head, and you understand when you leave exactly what it takes to do that process.
Yeah. So yeah, I don't have a rebuttal for that or a
That's
thought off
okay.
because I do enjoy those channels that go really super in depth, but there's not very many of them left.
Yeah. There's no money to be made on YouTube if you're a long format channel
Right.
showing total nerds how to do what you're doing.
Yeah.
But
Yeah.
but there is an audience for it, and they will find you. That is a fact.
Yeah. Was that your last one?
I think I have one more
Okay.
after that, but
Okay, cool. So uh I have a group of ones that I want to talk about, and then I have one more, and I'm been waiting to see if this last one was the same as one of yours, but you haven't said it yet. But I know you watch this channel, but I'll save that for a little bit later. But um, the three that I want to call out all as a group, and the reason why I want to call it all as a group is because they've stopped producing content. But when
mm,
they were producing content, it was some of the best content that I really enjoyed, and that is Jocko Whatever, Cactus Workshop, and Works by Solo, which we had Works by Solo as a guest
yeah.
a while ago. And the reason why I say those guys is because this was back, they were really popular back when YouTube was just first getting started in the maker community, when everybody was like jumping on YouTube. And they would just be like, bam, I'm gonna just make this random thing, and it was just like a whole bunch of stream of creativity. They weren't trying to sell you the sponsorship. They weren't trying to tell you, here's my 10 tips to get YouTube clicks. They were like, I have an idea. I'm going to execute this idea. And it was really, that was back when YouTube was awesome.
I I would piggyback on that. The first one that you mentioned, I think, was Shaka. Is that what I heard?
Jocko, whatever.
Oh, Jocko.
Jocko.
Yeah,
Oh, sorry, I pronounced his name wrong.
that's okay. I heard it wrong. Agreed. Giaco, phenomenal talent in terms of design and execution, manufacturing. He's still doing things. His Placed Atoms company is out
Hmm.
there. He's probably more on Instagram than he is on YouTube, but I think we lost a hell of a creator. And he's not totally gone. Every once in a while he'll pop up, but
Pop up. Yeah.
it used to be a fairly regular posting, and just loved his content. And somewhere in my stash, I've got a picture where he and I actually shook hands and met in real life. That was kind of
Yeah.
fun.
Cool.
But then Bernie, his sprocket
Hmm.
uh, fidget tool, is always sitting right here by my desk. I, we had him as a guest, and it's hard to say when you have somebody as a guest, but I look up to Bernie, and I think he's maybe one of the best designers that's ever uh, graced the data column in YouTube. His
For sure.
his innate ability to design beautiful things is almost unparalleled. I don't know that I've tuned into anyone else with that level of talent, and just a fascinating guy. I would love to have him back on and talk to Bernie again. But at some point, I'll meet Bernie in real life. I know we'll run into each other. It just we haven't had the opportunity yet. But and then Cactus Workshop, fantastic. Was he a Spanish speaking channel? Am I thinking right?
Most of his videos have no dialogue. He's just
Yeah,
really beautiful cinematography, just zoomed in. So I don't know. I don't even know his real name. I
yeah.
just know that that his photography was great. His storyline was fantastic. The things he
Yeah.
made were super creative. Like I can remember one where he like made a plant holder or something that showed when it was watered. So it was on some kind of weighted spring, and so as the water evaporated and dried up, it would raise up, and so then he knew to water it. Like just like crazy things. Like it's not really like a practical thing, but that's like a functional piece of art, or art that moves, something with motion. Right? It's just like, I don't know. I just thought it was cool stuff.
Yeah, well, I would agree. All three of those channels were power players in terms of maybe not necessarily in subscriber numbers or anything like that, but the content that they put out was
Hmm.
phenomenal. No doubt about it. Well, I've got one last channel that I want to mention, and I think I've mentioned it on our podcast before, but I think it's worth saying again. Michael DeTulo has a YouTube channel, and I think it's the letter D, the number two, and then LO, D2 low. And Michael is a designer, and he's designed things for Nike, He's now in the architectural space designing some things for a felt manufacturer to do acoustic absorption uh, inside of spaces that architects design. He's done clothing design, shoe design, car design, you name it. He's designed everything on the planet. And his YouTube channel, sometimes he'll just turn on some music, fire up his iPad, grab a pencil or an Apple pencil, and start to draw and design and talk through a design. Like, hey, today we're going to do a hiking boot, and he'll start with here's some inspiration pictures of hiking boots, but here's kind of where I want to go with this. And then he'll walk through 3 or 4 thumbnail sketches, and then he'll just start, and pick one and detail it all the way out, and maybe draw 1 or 2 or 3 views of it, show you how to render it, and all the techniques that he uses. Every once in a while, I think he draws by hand and uses markers and things of that, whiteout pens and markers and Sharpies, but just his stream of consciousness talking through his design process is something that I think anybody in our space, that design space, can learn from, seeing how he refines things. And I'm going to put one bonus thing in there before I leave Michael DeTullo. Bonus channel, how about that? Is Ray Shalene is a metal worker who does uh, he does cars, and he talks through making panels for cars, but he's an incredible designer and has an incredible design mind, talking through form development. And if anybody's working in true 3 dimensions, you need to tune into Ray and watch Ray. Ray is spelled Wray. Ray Shalene. I think he calls it Metal Shaping is the name of his channel, maybe something like that. Ray Shalene's Pro Metal Shaper, something. Anyway, uh, sorry, got off on a tangent there,
Oh,
but
that's
Michael
right.
DeTullo, check out his YouTube channel for sure.
So on this guy wasn't on my list, but I occasionally watch his channel. Ron Covell. Have you
Oh
ever
yeah,
seen that guy?
him
Yeah. So
him and Ray are right up there. They're at the top of their game. Ray much more on the design side. Ron Covell much more on the technical execution
mhm.
side is how I would put it. Yeah,
Yeah, I
or
started
Ron. I'm
watching
sorry.
Ron because I wanted to learn some more metal shaping stuff for some other future projects that I have in my brain that I have not found the funding or time to execute yet.
Oh,
So my last, oh, go ahead.
oh, I was gonna say I'll put one plug in for Ray. What he's doing right now, they designed a car, another version of an Alfa Romeo with AI, and he is building the physical manifestation of that AI development. Fascinating. That's where he's at
Wow,
right now in his YouTube channel.
interesting.
Oh, okay. Sorry for the
Okay,
interruption.
no, that's all right. So my last one, and I'm surprised you did not have this on your list, and you're probably going to be like, oh, duh, I should have had that on my list. Um, is Van Neistat for
Oh yeah,
storytelling.
yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, Van Neistat, his storytelling is fantastic. It reminds me of how a lot of TV was done when I was a kid. Like, um, yeah, I can't summons an example, but just how he films things and the aesthetic he had. He worked with Tom Sachs. He apprenticed with Tom Sachs, I would say, and so his aesthetic has a lot of Tom Sachs's stuff in it, and Tom Sax's aesthetic is very much from that 70s, 80s way of life from when we grew up. A couple of Gen Xers here, if you don't know how old we are. Um, but yeah, so it just has that great aesthetic that reminds me of when I was a kid. His storytelling is really inspiring.
Well, the thing that I really like about, I'll credit it to Tom Sachs, but Van worked for him for I think a fair amount of time in New York. You see Tom's aesthetic work its way through several other creators on YouTube. Casey Neistat also worked for Tom.
Yeah.
Um, you see it in in some of the woodworking channels that I've seen, you can tell that, oh yeah, they've watched a few Tom Sachs videos. Um, I would tell you that Adam Savage has a little bit of it in him too.
Mm-hmm.
Um, there's Tom's Tom's not inspiration, aesthetic has made its way a long way through things. What I find what I find really interesting about Van, and I'll go back to, if you look at, I think Tom Sachs has his own YouTube channel and he has a few videos that are studio videos, that are instructional videos to those who are going to work in his studio. And
Yes.
Van helped create those videos. I don't know who to attribute the credit for how those videos went together. I feel like it's more Van than it is Tom, but there are two videos that I always recommend people watch from that series. That Van did the cinematography. I think he also did the voiceover work for them, and all of that. 10 Bullets. If you've seen that one, you'll never
Mm-hmm.
forget it. I
Yep.
think it is a I don't know. It is a must see. Then his other is, I can't remember the title of it, but it's like Ode to Plywood or something along those lines.
Mm-hmm.
And it's his video about using plywood, how to use it, how to correctly paint it, all the things that go with plywood, the different types. And as a maker, it is again a must see because it gives you a different perspective of plywood and a different appreciation for plywood. But yes, Van Neistat, phenomenal talent, and I watch his videos the second they come out. Uh, I like his theory on cars and motorcycles
Mm-hmm.
and building things. He's got such a great way of telling stories.
Yeah. Yeah. So I think it might be worth saying like 10 bullets is like should be like um required watching for shop classes. But you got to know your audience because some of Tom Sax's stuff is sexualized or some inappropriate connotations in his stuff, because he is an artist that is pushing the edge of
Yep.
things, and sometimes that edge is an inappropriate edge by some people's standards.
Yeah, I've seen a number of interviews with Tom Sachs, and he loves to play that card because it gets a reaction from
Mhm.
people. And I think that's his guilty pleasure, is seeing how far he can push the conversation
Yeah.
before someone cuts him off, which whatever, everybody's got their thing and that's great. I do think the world of Tom and his, I'll call it his pretend world, but it's not a pretend world at all. It's a very real world.
Hmm.
And but he is definitely the master of that entire domain in terms of what goes in and what comes out. And yeah, I wanted to make 10 Bullets required viewing for the people I work with and around, and I learned very quickly that I could not make that required
Yeah,
viewing.
if you have an HR department, you want to be careful by showing that. But if you're like a one man shop that's hiring a person, and you have had some kind of conversation that you can be like, okay, this person's not going to get upset or offended, then
Yeah,
it's totally a good way to go.
yeah. and, and Tom's got several other videos that I think Van Neistat had a hand in producing on his. I think they're all on his YouTube channel. The I see other people hack away at some of the content there, and it's again inspiration, right? Like there's
Hmm.
nothing wrong, but I've always said it this way: don't borrow somebody's idea, steal it, and stealing it means that you made it yours and not theirs anymore. So um, anyway,
Yeah,
awesome stuff.
the true talent is in the iteration.
It
Is
is.
always my thought. Like if you're gonna build something that someone else has built, iterate on it.
Yeah, agreed. Push us another step forward. Take us past, t- take us past mid-century modern into the 21st century.
Yeah, just
Uh,
because you have a 22.5 degree miter doesn't mean it's mid-century modern.
well, I think we're just past the hour mark here.
Yeah. Do you
I
have any off? off YouTube suggestions? Because I have one.
All right, I've got one that I have on my list, but I'm almost afraid to share it because I think people will question me. One of my absolute guilty pleasures, and I don't watch it anymore because the cast changed and whatever else, was Project Runway. And uh I'm not into fashion or anything like that. I mean, look at the way I dress. I'm absolutely not into fashion. But Tim Gunn, who was the critic or one of the critics, he was the critic that would he was like Yoda to all the people that were participating in this reality TV show for fashion designers. His ability to dissect a design issue and explain what you needed to do to turn around and fix it is unparalleled. He might be the most talented person on the planet when it comes to assessing a design problem, your solution to it, why that doesn't work, but how to turn it around into something that does. I gleaned so much from him in terms of how to dissect a design into its component parts and build it back up into something better.
Okay, so this doesn't have anything to do with my list, but you reminded me of it with the Project Runway, and one of the movies that I enjoyed that my wife picked because she picks a lot of chick flicks, and I'm like, okay, we'll sit and watch it. But one that I really enjoyed along the same lines or similar lines of Project Runway was a movie called Devil Wears Prada,
Oh yeah.
and it was kind of a look into how the fashion industry works or how ruthless and cutthroat it is can be. But
Yeah.
yeah, so my offline thing would be a podcast, and also it's a book, 99% Invisible. And it's by Roman Mars, 99% Invisible. And the book and podcast talk about things that are designed but invisible that we don't pay any attention to. Like why, like if you look at a street pole and why they didn't just like bury that street pole or that, let me use
Light
this
pole.
more of a correct point. Yeah, light pole or a street light pole or whatever. Why they didn't bury that into just concrete? Why did they put a pad on there and then there's a big space with bolts on there, right? Like, why is that? So he goes into all kinds of things of like why is it designed like that with that big space and it's just bolted together like that?
Yeah.
So that
Yeah.
kind of stuff.
I'm gonna have to, well, kind of wrapping up. I've got a lot of homework to do and and a list of YouTube channels and otherwise blogs and so forth to add to what I'm doing here. Um Again, I've always said it, the further away sometimes that you get from what you're doing, the maybe more inspiration that you can glean from things. And um I I'll say it this way. I just came out with a product on the skyscraper side of things that is a guitar side bender. So a side bender for
Mhm.
acoustic guitars. And when I got done with it and they finally started to retail last week. Last weekend, I released them. Oh my goodness, it was a 2 year project. That machine uses almost every single skill and medium that I work in. It's got machined parts, it's got welded parts, it has plastic parts, it's got wooden parts, it has parts that move. Uh, it's and an electronic circuit that goes with it as well. And it's like I took a step back and I'm like, this is the culmination of everything I know how to do. And I think that is all a testament to making sure that I stay inspired and I'm always watching out for things to hit me from a different direction.
Yeah. Yeah. If you scroll past the first page of YouTube, there's a whole wealth of things worth watching.
Absolutely, there are. Well, like I said a little bit earlier, we've kind of rolled past the hour mark. I want to thank everybody for joining us here on the podcast, talking about where we find or where our secrets are for inspiration. I am Greg Porter. You can find me at Greg's Garage here on YouTube or Instagram. You can also find me at Skyscraper Guitars in the same places.
And I'm Brian Benham. You can find me at benhamdesignconcepts.com or benham_design on all the social platforms that I participate in. And you are listening to the Maker's Quest podcast. So visit the makersquest.com for the show notes, where we'll try to put as many links as we can to all these different things that we talked about today. Thanks for listening.